Hello, everybody, and welcome to a declaration of no spoilers. That's right, this is a non-spoiler Attack on Titan video. If you're an anime only, I hope that you've been enjoying this Marley arc as much as I remember enjoying it in the manga. By now you've probably heard that the manga is ending. As of this recording, there's only 3 chapters left. So it'll end with chapter 139, and fans were very quick to discover that the reason for that number is because of the 13-year curse of Ymir, which is the amount of time that a Titan shifter has left to live after they obtain their powers by eating one of the 9 intelligent titans. And so, of course, the 9 pertains to the 9 shifting powers, or the 9 intelligent titans. One of the things that I really appreciate about reading the manga is that you're essentially setting your own pace as you read. So when the story is action-packed, when there's a lot of action sequences, your eyes just kind of glide through the page and everything is super quick and fluid, and it's like boom, action beat after action beat. But then the opposite is also true. Like when you get character moments and you're reading it, you get to spend time with these moments and really process them and really think about what they mean. Whereas in the anime, they have a 24-minute window to fit everything in. And yes, technically you can pause the episode to absorb those moments at your own pace, but if you don't pause the thing or rewind it, I can definitely see a lot of people missing out on some details. Like, for example, if I was an anime only, I probably wouldn't have caught on to the fact that the reason for why Annie was following Kenny in the underground in the first place was because Kenny used to be friends with Uri. And so since Uri at one point was the real king inside the walls and possessed the powers of the founding titan, and Kenny was his bodyguard, or he became his bodyguard and friend, that's why it makes sense that Annie is following Kenny, because the whole goal of the warrior unit that infiltrated Paradis was to get their hands on the founding titan. Also, the fact that we see Eren's grandfather having a mental breakdown right next to him actually touches on how guilt-ridden he must feel, because the day his own daughter died by being eaten alive by dogs, he essentially decided to sweep it under the rug as if nothing had happened, and then he also went on to try and brainwash his son with government propaganda. It's some really messed up stuff that highlights the darkness of authoritarian regimes. The story of the old man in the field is also another reference worth noting here, because not only is his story the one that Reiner, Bertolt, and Annie steal and use as a cover-up story to infiltrate the recruits, like Bertolt even tells the story to Eren essentially verbatim, but also it's the guilt that the man feels about leaving his kids behind, which completely relates to how Reiner currently feels in the story over the things that he did in Paradis.
This week the anime did cut out a scene, a conversation actually, between Tybur and Magath. Now the chapter was already very dialogue heavy to begin with, so I understand why they felt the need to cut out that conversation. But the cool thing about it for me, the thing that really stood out to me from that scene, is that Magath essentially tells Tybur, you know, if you actually go through with this, if you actually go on and deliver this speech, I won't be able to protect you. And so I believe that you're going to die. And so that kind of adds a little bit more context to what Tybur is feeling during that speech, because deep down he knows that he won't survive this, that these are essentially his last words. Now, the source material for this episode, A Declaration of War, actually corresponds to chapter 100 in the manga. And so, chapter 100, that's a milestone chapter, right? That's kind of a benchmark chapter. And usually manga authors, they use those chapters to sort of make a statement. And so I think what makes this chapter so special is that this is the chapter where Isayama puts his cards on the table and says, look, this is what my manga is about. Isayama's thesis for the entire series is contained in this chapter, specifically within the dialogue between Eren and Reiner.
See, the episode sort of touches on this nature versus nurture type of debate, where Eren essentially tells Reiner that he's a product of his environment. Eren says, you were just a kid back then, Reiner. A kid that was taught to hate by ignorant adults. And so that's what Eren says, but then Reiner responds, no, Eren, it wasn't just my environment. The day Marcel got eaten, Annie and Bertolt wanted us to turn back. I was the one who convinced him to keep moving forward. That's on me. And so ultimately Isayama's conclusion for that scene is that whether it happened by choice or as a result of the environment, what matters is one thing: the fact that both Eren and Reiner are both human. And as humans, they have the same capacity for good as they do for evil. That's kind of the point of the story. People you thought were good can actually turn around on you and commit atrocities, and people you thought were evil can turn out to be not so bad as you originally thought. And so the end of this episode is kind of like Eren is saying, you know, all those years, I viewed you as the villain. You were the bad guy to my story. But now it's your turn, Reiner. Because from now on, you'll be the one to see me as the bad guy.
In case you haven't already, I would really recommend that you listen to this OST. I think it's phenomenal. It's a fan-made arrangement that is based off some music that was leaked at some point. But it's a fan-made arrangement, and it just captures the essence of not only this chapter, but the chapters that come after it, like the next 2 or 3 episodes. This music is just like cinematic, and it just fits, like it really captures what I was feeling when I was reading those manga chapters. And I remember when I first read the chapter in the manga, I think the manga makes it a little bit more clear that Eren essentially kills the people in the apartment building. Because, you know, he says like, above, you know, it's an apartment building, it's full of people. So if I transform, and so he transforms, and so all those people, essentially, like you learn that those people die. And so I remember reading it, and my first reaction to it being, oh my gosh, is Eren like anime Darth Vader? Is that what he is? Because they both start off very angry, enraged even, over the fact that they can't protect and save the people that they love and care about. You know, Yoda has that speech in Phantom Menace where he says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And to me, like, I visualize Anakin and Eren in a very similar position of suffering. But I guess the major difference here is that in order to be seduced by the dark side, like Siths, they have to sort of give in to their passions. Like, that's the thing that fuels them, their passion, their hate, right? Whereas if you look at how Eren behaves ever since season 3, right, you can see that he's essentially passionless. Like, he's just completely brokenhearted, disillusioned even. Like, if you take a look at his affect, it's completely flat. And so clinically speaking, somebody with flat affect like that, somebody with that kind of facial expression, that is a clear-cut sign of somebody who's depressed. Which really isn't the case with Vader, because Vader is busy running an administration, and he runs it based on being ruthless and sort of tapping into that hate and anger. Whereas the way in which Eren feels right now, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rage and hate involved internally. Like, at no point during his conversation with Reiner did I think to myself, yeah, it really looks like Eren just hates Reiner. I didn't get that. Like, the way Eren sees it, it's more of like, you know, I don't hate you, Reiner. I don't even necessarily hate Marley. It's just that this thing that I'm about to do, to me, it just seems like it's the most logical next step, given what has happened. And it's really dark, because again, it doesn't come from a place of passion. It comes from a place of hopelessness. And it's like, what else am I going to do? Now, granted, there's a time skip, right? There is a big time lapse that we don't get to see in terms of Eren's process. Like, we see him at the beach at the end of season 3. Fast forward a couple years, you know, next time we see him, he's infiltrated Marley pretending to be a wounded soldier. And so there's a lot of missing information. And that's another thing that kind of separates Eren from other, you know, characters that make this journey into the dark side, is that for the most part, we kind of understand, like, we know what Anakin is thinking, right? We know what led him to that point. When it comes to Eren, there's a lot of missing pieces, and so we don't know for sure what he's thinking. You know, we can only make assumptions based on what he says, but we don't really get like this sort of internal picture of what brought him to this. I read an interview recently with the director of this final season, you know, the guy from MAPPA, and then I think Isayama's editor was also, you know, part of the interview. But the director was sort of talking about how, I mean, I think we all knew that, like, this was going to be, like, production-wise, this was going to be a very chaotic season. And so the director kind of admits to it. He says that they had a very limited amount of time to be able to grasp the essence and the setting and just the main components of the previous 3 seasons to be able to make something cohesive with what the previous studio had done. So it's been this very chaotic, fast-paced thing, and you can kind of tell, just based off how like some of the Titans look. Like sometimes they're CGI, sometimes they're hand-drawn, 2D, all that stuff. And it was crazy to me because I remember watching that very first episode of this final season, and most comments about that first episode, like they weren't discussing the plot at all. They weren't talking about the characters or the plot. They were mainly talking about the animation and the production value. And so, of course, in case you don't know, the reason for why the production has been kind of fast-paced and the staff has been sort of pulling a Speedy Gonzalez is because they want to make sure that this final season coincides with the finale of the manga, right? Because the manga ending, that brings in hype, that gets people excited. So, got a lot of people invested. But then if you have an anime running alongside it, you can kind of ride that wave. And so a lot of the research that had to be done in this limited amount of time, again, involved being able to grasp the concepts of the previous 3 seasons in order to start working on this 4th season. According to the interview, there was this back and forth between the staff, mainly the director, and Isayama's editor. And one of the things that, the director or the staff would ask is like, is this group of people supposed to represent this group of people in history? Kind of like the same questions that we as fans have, right? Like, are the Eldians supposed to be Jewish? Like, who are the Germans in this case, right? And so, the staff would ask that of the editor, and in the interview, the editor says, I don't know. And so, to me, that gets me to think that if the editor doesn't know, then that's probably because there isn't an answer to it. I think Isayama has been really good at being vague in terms of categorizing people. I don't think that's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to label like these groups as being something real in history. There are obviously some references, right? Like that's what we kind of look at and you're like, okay, so this means this. But at the end of the day, I think Isayama is vague on purpose because that's not what matters in this story. At the end of the day, those things don't matter as much as the viewers and the readers understanding that this is a story about human beings. And as human beings, we all kind of want sort of the same things. We all have the same feelings, and we all have very similar experiences.
Okay, so now that it's been made clear that Eren is pretty much set on this path of moving forward until all his enemies are eliminated, and also how it was established that the beginning of Season 4 was pretty much meant for readers and viewers to begin to empathize with the people of Marley, right? To begin to see them as people as opposed to just invaders. A good question comes up, and that's how does this end? What's the ending look like? Well, I've actually had some time to think about this, and I ended up noticing a pattern in Isayama's writing style. And that's essentially the fact that Isayama is really good at combining pros and cons and packaging them together to hand them to the reader. In other words, Isayama is really good at balancing positive outcomes with negative outcomes and using them to deliver a final product as a conclusion. I mean, just think about the ending of Season 1, for example. Back then, the Survey Corps was able to defeat and capture Annie, so that's a positive for them. Unfortunately, Annie crystallizes herself, making sure that they won't be able to extract any information out of her. So that's a negative. In the ending of Season 2, Hannes gets eaten by Dina Fritz's Titan. It's a very sad scene. Definitely a negative. But then after Eren punches her, it's revealed to us that he actually has the power of the Coordinate, or the Founding Titan. So that's a positive. In Season 3, the Alliance captures Bertolt, and thus is able to obtain the powers of the Colossal Titan, so that's a win. But before that happens, they're actually stuck trying to decide which one of the lives of their 2 strategic geniuses they're gonna end up saving. Same thing with the basement. They finally get there, they read some books, get some info, but at the same time, they figure out that there's an even bigger problem beyond the walls. And so this is kind of where the biggest shift inside of Eren happens, because all this time, he wanted to get to the thing because he thought that if he got to the thing, things would be a lot better, and then he actually got to the thing, and it turns out that things were even messier than he thought. That's kind of what makes the story so engaging, is that it's kind of how life is, right? Pros and cons, ups and downs. So I definitely don't expect a full-on happy ending, but I also don't expect the series to end with 100% tragedy either. I fully expect a bittersweet ending. And we also know this because Isayama was a really big fan of Game of Thrones, but he was also disappointed with the finale, so he wants to make sure that he doesn't commit the same mistake. That being said, before the finale even aired, George R.R. Martin was telling fans to expect a bittersweet ending for the series. And so I feel like the essence of that is pretty much the same with Isayama, because you're dealing with very complex issues. Now, regardless of what that bittersweet conclusion actually is, one thing is for sure, and that's the fact that Armin will be key in deciding the resolution to this conflict. I mean, obviously, I think the three of them are super important, but I think it's going to come down to Armin to figure it out, because in season 1, there's actually a scene where Eren and Mikasa literally turn to Armin and tell him, "We're depending on you to come up with the right answer." It's the scene where the garrison is about to shoot them because they found out that Eren has Titan powers and so they view him as a threat. And so Eren is like, okay, I came up with 2 options here. The first one is I use my powers to try and make a run for it, to try and escape. And then the second option I have is to believe in you and what you decide, Armin. Because when things get really bad, you always end up coming up with the right answer.
Because out of the 3, Armin has always been the most intellectual from the bunch, but he's also been the most insecure out of them as well. So I think that kind of works to rectify that insecurity in that sense, because even from the first episode, Armin never really felt like he was worthy enough of being Eren and Mikasa's friend, whereas the other 2 never actually questioned his worth in the first place. Like, he was the one who was kind of like putting himself down. And so I feel like that has to come to a resolution by the end of the series, where Isayama lifts Armin up and says, like, no, like, you're worth it, you know? This is the power of you being able to look at a complex situation and negotiate, or, you know, come up with a just as equally complex solution. Just one more thing before I go. During Tybur's speech, he basically admits to being an Eldian, right? And he says, you know, I hate my blood as much as anybody else, or more than anybody else. And he says, but I don't want to die because I was born into this world. And we cut to Eren's reaction, and it's just like, whoa, like, it's a very brief shot, but he's just like, it kind of takes him aback, right? And so the reason for that is because that's the exact same thing that he said at one point when he had lost sort of control of the Attack Titan. You know, when he used the Attack Titan to use the boulder to block the hole, right? He kind of lost control. He attacked Mikasa, and Armin had to go in and talk to Eren and kind of have him snap out of it. And one of the things that Armin asks Eren is, okay, so you told me you wanted to leave the walls. You wanted to see the world outside of the walls. You wanted to be free. Why is that, Eren? And Eren says, well, it's because I was born into this world. And the line is also mentioned by Carla, Eren's mom, when she says that Eren doesn't have to do anything special or great. He's already special because he was born into this world. And another way of saying the same thing, another way of saying born into this world is, it's because I'm alive. It's because I'm a human being. And so for this very small fraction of a second, there's this possibility of common ground between Eren and Tybur. But then Tybur goes on to say, and so I proclaim to the enemy forces of Paradis, whatever, this is a declaration of war. And so that's where Eren's like, nope, it's go time. No common ground here. So it's like this little fraction of this possibility of peace kind of gets torn apart and crescendos upward into violence. And so I feel like Isayama is sort of saying, if only we as human beings viewed each other the way a loving mother views their child, we would have a lot less problems. And ultimately, forgetting that, that's what leads us down this road of violence. But also, unfortunately, forgetting that is also part of the reality of humanity. And you'll see that evolve later down the road in the series. So the challenge really is to not forget. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Take care. Catch you guys later. Bye.